About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments on KXCR, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller. I've been studying consciousness and cybernetics and anthropology for a very long time, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined the field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer whatever questions you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Most of us know in the world of medicine and psychology, we are conscious when we're awake, aware, and knowing what's going on around us. In the field of noetics, though, consciousness is so much more. Not only is it those things we're aware of, it's those processes and products of mind that are outside of our awareness, that are unconscious. And it's those profound experiences that shape our lives. But as more and more studies are explored and more explanations come up, we're beginning to understand that consciousness is ultimately what connects us all. On this series, oh my goodness, we're at number 30. And 1 and 2, we're looking at Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung years ago, 100 years ago actually, the early 20th century, explaining how much of what goes on in the mind is not in our normal awareness, is in fact unconscious, and they began to define maps of how that might look. By the 1960s, that was pretty much accepted, and Charles Tart began to describe various states of consciousness in which we would have access to different parts of what was in our mind. Julian Jaynes continued that work, looking at how what is available in one hemisphere is not available to the other. But then we looked at the fact that brain phenomena seem to be operating faster than nerve signals. And this is the source of the idea of field models of mind that were developed by Kurt Lewin, Rupert Sheldrake, and many others, trying to explain how mind is affected by and affects the body and other things so much faster than nerve signals can travel. Which brought up how quantum mechanics relates to consciousness, as described in the work of David Bohm, Dana Zohar, Amit Goswami, and many others. We also looked at Teilhard de Chardin's noosphere, or Peter Russell's global brain, and Ervin Laszlo's global mind, which took us to the field of transpersonal psychology, applying some of these understandings in therapy and further research. We pulled back into the body with Candace Pert's Molecules of Emotion, explaining how hormones from the brain affect cells throughout the body, and Bruce Lipton taking that the next step, suggesting that our biology is based on our belief system, which we will look at some today. That led to the exploration of coherence, the idea that the mind and the body and the emotions can all be in alignment, a coherent state of consciousness, which then leads to the experimental results that led to the telepathic communication between two people, actually demonstrated mind affecting matter, and the experience of remote viewing or clairvoyance. As we looked at that, we realized we have to be careful about what different states of consciousness we're operating in. So we explored the idea of frequency and how we can move into higher and lower states of consciousness, frequencies of vibration patterns in the brain and heart, using the work with Penny Pierce, the study of cymatics, and the water crystal experiments of Masaru Emoto, among others. For several episodes after that, we looked at the healing process and the role that consciousness and those vibratory patterns play in the body's response to threats and distress. Then we looked, over the last several shows, at the brain, which is the bridge between mind and body, and most materialist scientists think is the origin of our consciousness. You can catch up on all those past shows on the KXCR.net archives. You can click on the little cloud that's up on the banner at the top of the KXCR.net screen. You can also find them on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you will also find links to the books and the people and the video clips that I refer to on the show. Now, we've been talking about the brain for a couple of weeks, how various parts of it are associated with different activities, how we can track those activities through the electrical signals generated by the neurons as they send chemicals to other neurons, and how there are distinct rhythms of vibration and activity across the brain that can be measured. But we need to remember that the brain is not the mind. And what do I mean by that? Well, for all the work that's been done with brain tissue and neuronal signals, there is no evidence that any thought actually originates in the brain. We can find which parts of the brain are associated with specific words, memories, or actions, but that's as far as the research has gone in that direction. And there's another factor to consider. We touched on it the last time, and we discussed it in some detail a few months ago, and that is the fact that much of what goes on in human experience has that field quality rather than a series of electrical signals moving through the body. For example, when ice skaters or dancers execute a complex maneuver very quickly, the signals would have to travel through the nervous system faster than the speed of light if they were coming from any part of the brain. And this is one of the factors, one of the experiences contributing to the model of mind as field. And that really is the crux of the matter. Mind is the source of thought and of action. If we look at all the research from that perspective, we can see that the brain is the means by which that thought or action is brought to our awareness, to our sensory apparatus. For example, if I remember a really wonderful experience, that memory is received by the brain and the chemicals are released into the body as neuropeptides, or molecules of emotions, that make the cells and tissues feel good. If I remember some of the visual qualities of that experience, I see the colors and the textures, then the visual cortex is excited as well. But neither the neuropeptides nor the visual cortex have caused the memory. They've just been activated by it. And so now I perceive in the body the results of the thought. So the mind must be considered as a field that includes all of the body and the brain. This means that our biology is, as Carolyn Myss put it, our biography. That our current anatomy and physiology are the record of what's been going on in our mind. Of course, the implications for this are staggering. It means that truly all medicine is, as Norman Cousins wrote back in the 1960s, the placebo effect. In fact, as Joe Dispenza wrote in the early 2000s, we are the placebo. Let him tell you about that.
I wrote The Placebo because I started becoming fascinated with the idea that you can give someone a sugar pill, a saline injection, or perform some false surgery or treatment, and a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought that they're getting the actual substance or treatment, and they begin to program their autonomic nervous system to make the exact pharmacy of chemicals equal to the substance that they think they're taking. So then it begs the question, is it the inert placebo that's doing the healing, or is it the body's innate capacity to heal by thought alone? Because that pill is a symbol of possibility. All it is a symbol. The doctor says, this is a great new drug that's going to help with depression, and the person begins to think about the idea that they could get better. They're selecting a new potential in the quantum field. And then all of a sudden, a certain percentage of those people will get enthusiastic and theos, filled with God, inspired, optimistic. They start changing their emotional state. They're combining a clear intention with an elevated emotion, and they're changing their state of being. And all of a sudden now, I began to realize, do you need the sugar pill? Do you need the saline injection? Or can you teach a person, instead of putting their faith and belief in something exogenous outside of them, that would do the healing, to change their state of being? Can they just select a new potential in the quantum field, instead of focusing on a known, focus on an unknown, and revisit that unknown every single day until it becomes a known? And all of a sudden, you'll see people's depression go away, their anxiety go away, and they're not using the placebo any longer. They're healing by changing their internal states. And so that's when we started seeing those changes taking place. Before I wrote the placebo, it was a landslide. So that's when I started measuring, doing all the brain scans and the HRV monitors and the genetic tests and the immune system tests and the telomere tests, because we now know that it's possible. And so a person doesn't need the exogenous or external substance. They can move into a state of being without it.
So what Joe Dispenza discovered through his work was we don't need the pills. Bruce Lipton also found similar results, and I'll let him share his work. This is the author of The Biology of Belief, and his work has always been with the cells themselves.
As we change our consciousness, we change the chemistry of our blood, which in turn is what controls our genetic behavior. So the issue is, can a positive thought have a positive influence on a body? And the answer is absolutely it can, for a very simple reason. When we have a positive thought, the secretions of the brain that go into the blood are all secretions that enhance the vitality of our cells and the maintenance of our body. Now, you say, is that really true? Does belief actually influence this? And I go, well, for nearly 100 years, medicine has recognized the value of something called the placebo effect. The placebo effect is what? The concept of a positive outcome from some experience that controls the outcome. So, for example, a person is suffering from an illness and their doctor says, listen, I have this brand new drug, the greatest, latest thing from the pharmaceutical industry. And it's even colored purple because it's so much more effective. And if you take this drug, it's going to resolve the issues you have in your health. Well, if you take that drug based on what the doctor just said and the belief the doctor just offered, you take the drug and then you get well and you say, yes, oh my goodness, the drug healed me, but later find out the drug was nothing more than a sugar pill. Well, the significance is, then what healed you? The answer is not the sugar pill. So what else is left? The belief in the sugar pill healed you. The positive belief that you hold when you take that drug. That's called the placebo effect. And interesting fact, over 1/3 of all medical involvement, the positive outcome is not due to the medical process itself, but is due to the placebo effect, where the patient believes whatever treatment they're getting is actually going to heal them. And this is profoundly significant because it's another way of understanding mastery over your biology. The biology of belief, in this case, the biology of a positive thought, is what will ultimately control your health. The relevance, again, is very simple, is that a positive belief releases positive chemistry from the brain that goes through the body and the blood. And this chemistry in the blood is what controls our health and our vitality and our happiness.
Yes, 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 people don't need medicine to improve. They just need someone to tell them that what they are taking will cause them to improve and to believe that. The improvement starts in their mind. This means that the management of their illness is a function of what's going on in their minds. Now, I'm not saying it's all in your mind, as in you're just imagining it. No. In fact, what I'm saying is that we've all been taught and trained to believe that certain experiences and conditions will cause certain symptoms, and that other experiences and conditions will relieve those symptoms. And the placebo effect tells us that if we believe we have those other experiences or conditions, we can become symptom-free. So illness is a function of belief. Symptoms occur because we've been trained to have them. The mind has accepted certain ideas, and the brain has received those ideas and transmitted the appropriate chemicals to the appropriate places in the body to generate the symptoms. And this is what Phineas Quimby and Thomas Troward, who we talked about a few weeks back, discovered 180 years ago now, and helped people overcome. They changed the belief system and so reduced or eliminated the symptoms. If we look at what Deepak Chopra says in his book Quantum Healing, and in many other places, this American-trained endocrinologist is convinced that our belief is the function of our experience, as we just heard from Drs. Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton. So, mind is the cause, not the experience or condition, but the beliefs held in the mind, not the imagination, but the deep down, I know it's true, beliefs that we accepted from parents and teachers and doctors and computers and TV from the moment we were conceived. The brain is the means by which what is held in the mind is translated into the body, transmitted into chemical reactions in the body. If we want to know what is going on between mind and body, we look at what's going on in the brain. It's been a wonderful, wonderful 100 years of discovery and possibility, and we get to reap the benefits over the years ahead. Well, that brings us to books. And what I'd like to offer you today is a book that was the Medical Self-Care Magazine Book Award winner some years ago. It's called, surprise, surprise, Healing from Within. It's by Dennis T. Jaffe. It's from Simon & Schuster, and it's fairly old, actually. It's 1980. And it's actually one of the things that helped me when I was having to go through a major healing crisis in the 80s. Jaffe's subtitle is Psychological Techniques to Help the Mind Heal the Body. And he says on the back, Healing from Within views good health as living in harmony with one's inner self. It defines illness from a physiological and psychological perspectives and offers a self-help program using holistic techniques aimed at the individual's ability to maintain a balance when faced with changes in the family and environment. Some of the chapters in Part 1, The Many Faces of Disease, Health and Healing, chapters include The Healing Partnership, Disease is Adaptation, The Personal Message of Illness, and goes on to the placebo power, which we've been talking about today. Section 2, Illness and Human Relationships, The Physical Cost of Loss and Change, Coping and Control, Protecting Ourselves from Stress, Repressed Emotions and Self-Care, The Family Crucible of Illness. And in Part 3, Working for Your Health, and it's the series of exercises, a self-help program. The Body is the Temple, Pathways to Relaxation, Biofeedback, Control of Self-Defeating Behaviors, Freeing Yourself from the Past, Creating Your Future, and the Healing Power of Imagery, and Dialogue with the Self in using your inner healer. Believe it or not, in the 1980s, all these tools were available to us, but we have consistently trained our medical personnel to look only for material, mechanical, and chemical solutions to what appear to be physical problems in the body. But as we have learned today, what is going on in the mind is being translated and transmitted into the body and is the source and the cause of the experience. What we need to do when we want to heal, as Jaffe put it, healing from within. We want to heal from within. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments on KXCR 90.7 FM, streaming on KXCR.net. And that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today and what you, the listeners, are curious about. One of the things that's going on in the world today is a new study on schizophrenia. And the title is We Might Be Treating Schizophrenia All Wrong by Simon Spichak, S-P-I-C-H-A-K, on the Getty News Service. For more than 70 years, doctors treated the symptoms of schizophrenia, delusions, hallucinations, cognitive impairments with antipsychotic medications. Prevailing theories suggest that elevated dopamine signaling in the brain leads to schizophrenia, so these antipsychotics provide relief by tempering dopamine activity. Yet it's never been entirely clear, he says, how these drugs quiet dopamine activity. And due to their nature, these drugs have unwanted side effects. They're also saying on top of that, nearly a third of patients don't even respond to 2 or more common antipsychotic treatments. So the question is, what if there's a better way? Quote from Roger McIntyre, psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry and pharmacology at the University of Toronto. We don't know what causes schizophrenia, he says. Rigorous scientific studies that have been conducted have concluded that for some people, some of the symptoms of schizophrenia may be a consequence of a disturbance in the immune inflammatory system. This, in turn, may open the door to an entirely new way of treating. All right, so the folks in the new study analyzed blood from about 200 people with schizophrenia and compared it to blood samples from 200 healthy patients, and they discovered elevated levels of a particular antibody. And that antibody has to do with how cells in the brain communicate. So we're back to the role of the brain. So if the mind is transmitting or telling the brain to transmit something to the body, and the brain is not communicating properly, then what is getting transmitted to the body is not accurate. So as the article continues, the researchers isolated the antibodies and injected them into mice, and it caused cognitive impairments and other behaviors characteristics of schizophrenia. Quote, even though the mice only had these antibodies in their brains for a short time, they had changes in the behavior and synapses that were similar to what is seen in humans with schizophrenia. This is a quote from one of the researchers, Hidehiko Takahashi, a professor of psychiatry and schizophrenia research at Tokyo Medical and Dental University. All right. They also are looking at other kinds of things. People who live with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, depression are at higher risk of contracting COVID-19 and dying. And they found that autoimmune disorders are more than 70% more likely to develop schizophrenia. So we may have a very different understanding of how those particular behaviors that are called schizophrenia, it's just a term, a catalog of behaviors, really, how those behaviors may be related to a poor communication in the brain. Now, the brain's resident immune cells are called microglia, and they have been implicated in the development of schizophrenia. They are the gardener's quote of the brain. They cut off early unused or unneeded connections, and they clear away the debris and get rid of dysfunctional cells in the brain. But sometimes they can make a huge problem while they're doing that. And it turns out that certain kinds of infections during pregnancy are known to increase the risk of developing schizophrenia. And now they're beginning to wonder if there are ways that we can change how the microglia can work by changing the presence of this particular autoantibody that has been wreaking havoc in the communication response in the brain. So I thought you would enjoy knowing that we have reached a point where perhaps we may be able to begin to turn around through a combination of mental faculties and physical therapies this thing that we call schizophrenia. Well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use it fully. We are out of time for today. But remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you will find a list of past shows and the resources we refer to on the shows, and where you can send me your comments and questions, and I will do my best to get them answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM in Florence, Oregon, and have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.